Hello and welcome to another one of the revisited reviews from my Gran Turismo 6 days on the channel, and many of these original reviews are still here with the higher pitched audio and the potato cam mic and all of that kind of good stuff, but the reason why I want to revisit some of these vehicles in particular is because, as I've said before, especially with these premium cars in Gran Turismo 6, I believe that like many of the cars in GT Sport, they will most likely make a return at some point in Gran Turismo's future. Otherwise, it seems like an unusual amount of effort to put into updating a vehicle that's never going to come back, especially when you look at how long and how much use Polyphony likes to get out of a particular car model. They stretch it as long as it can go, typically speaking. And this time, of course, the car in question is not the most popular thing around. The looks divide opinion, the performance isn't necessarily the most useful thing, and even for people who do use a hybrid or electric car in Gran Turismo 6, most will probably just go for a Tesla, because it's the obvious choice, at least as far as street cars go. However, I am here to present an alternative, and that alternative actually happens to be one of my favourite cars. The Fisker Karma is genuinely a vehicle which I absolutely love. I love the way it looks, I love the concept, which for those who don't know, and I'm sure I touched on this in that original video, is kind of like the exact opposite to the way a hybrid would typically work. With most hybrids you have a petrol or diesel engine, usually a small petrol motor, combined with electric. And then you have the electric power around town, you have the fuel burner for longer journeys, because those are where each of those propulsion systems, if you will, those power sources are more efficient. Electric motors aren't as efficient at higher speeds, and fuel burners are not as efficient at lower speeds, so they complement each other very well. The idea with the Fisker is actually similar to a concept that I wanted to do with my own fictional supercar idea, which is to have a gas turbine engine, which instead of driving the wheels, actually acts as a generator to power 4 electric motors to actually drive the car. The Fisker does a similar thing. It has a 2-litre petrol-burning General Motors built engine under the bonnet, like a normal car. It even has side exit exhausts as well. But that engine doesn't drive the wheels. The electric motors drive the wheels, and the fuel burning in the engine acts as a generator, kind of like those little diesel generators you see on a building site, to power the electronic side of the car. It's also got a number of other cool little features and gimmicks, which in my opinion are not a bad thing. It's got solar panels on the roof, which powers the majority of the electronics inside the cabin. It has, if I recall correctly, a recycled interior with kind of a faux leather made from those recycled materials. It's got a lot of very clever and cool little things put into it. It is very much so the frou-frou of hybrid cars. For somebody in, for instance, Hollywood who doesn't want a Prius, wants something that has more of the road presence of a Bentley or an Aston Martin, and that it definitely does, because Mr. Fisker, who designed the car, actually has designed for BMW, I believe it was, definitely for Aston Martin in the past as well. Now, in terms of performance though, which of course is generally speaking the most important thing in a racing game, it compares interestingly to the Tesla. It's not quite as powerful. It has 398 horsepower to the, I believe it's 422 on the Tesla. However, the torque figure on this car is absolutely nuts. It has 959 foot-pounds of torque, which is basically Bugatti Veyron territory. In fact, this has among the highest torque of any car in the game. Now, it's extremely heavy. It's up there with the Bentley Continental GT, in fact, at over 2.4 tons, 2,404 kilos, which is a big boy, for sure. It's a chungus of a car as far as EVs go especially, which are normally not exactly lightweight anyway. The Tesla is a 2-ton car. In terms of pricing, it's again more than the Tesla, 138,000 credits, which isn't too crazy. It's expensive for an EV, but it's not crazy expensive in the world of Gran Turismo. In terms of performance, it's reasonably quick. Much like you'd expect, you have that very linear acceleration with no actual gear changes. In terms of handling though, that's where it really gets interesting in comparison to the Tesla, because one of the criticisms I would actually level against Tesla, as somebody who, unlike last time I talked about Tesla on the channel in Gran Turismo, I've actually driven one now in real life, so I have a pretty good gauge of how it compares. And one of the criticisms I would give Tesla, in real life and in Gran Turismo, or pretty much any game that features them, is they feel a bit dead through corners. They're not really designed for handling, which is fair enough, it's not that kind of car. The Fisker actually feels really good through corners. And part of the reason why is it has this very strange layout of having a front engine, but technically also rear-mounted engines in the form of the motors. It's rear-wheel drive. It has a very supercar-esque stance, so even though it's really heavy, the center of gravity is super low with the batteries. It's very wide, very long, and super low. It almost has the kind of shape of something like a BMW 6 Series Gran Coupe or an Aston Martin Rapide, but accentuated even more. And that's actually one of my favourite things about the design. And on a slight side note, it's actually one of the reasons why I love the way my Jag looks, the XKR. To me, there are certain cars which the body defines the design of, and there are other cars where the design is defined by the wheels. And the Fisker is definitely one of those. Because if you look at the shape of the car, it's all about the wheels. It has these huge 22-inch rims, and the entire wheel arch of the front end and the back end is all sculpted around accentuating the shape of those wheels. It really makes the wheels stick out as far as they can be on the four corners of the car. It's almost like a four-door version of what the Gillette Vertigo looks like, if you really compare the two. That in turn allows the car to have pretty much genuine sports car handling. Now you can drop a huge amount of weight out of the car, and one of the crucial advantages of something like the Tesla or this Fisker, and for me I tended to use the Fisker more because I prefer it over the Tesla, is unlike a normal car, a diesel or a petrol in Gran Turismo, you can actually lower the performance points by a significant amount. You can even drop the power, for instance, and it doesn't really change the top speed of the car. Now, the acceleration gets a little bit slower, so it will take a bit longer to get there, but the top speed pretty much remains the same, which in the case of this car is only about 130, 135 miles an hour anyway, which isn't a surprise. Again, that's about the same as the Tesla, but that means that you can drop this car, for example, all the way down to about 400 points, maybe 425 is where I used to have it, and it will still be a 135 mile an hour car. And that's with a huge amount of dropped weight potentially as well if you lower the power by enough. So even though in its stock form it doesn't really have that much use, if you detune these electric cars, they're actually very good. And the only problem is then the slightly sluggish acceleration that comes with the loss of power. But in the case of this one, I would argue you don't even notice that as much because it has so much torque that you still have pretty good acceleration off the line anyway with those 900 pound-feet. In terms of overall use, it's definitely a car that gets overlooked by a lot of players. And unfortunately, because Gran Turismo and many racing games don't really favour the tuning of electric cars, uprated batteries, better motors, maybe even motor swaps between brands, which is technically much easier to do than a conventional engine swap, it's strange that a car like this doesn't have the use that it really deserves. At the time, it makes more sense. Nowadays, I think people are going to actually start to want more electric car tuning in games, because electric cars, like them or not, are becoming far more commonplace, and eventually just driving stock ones is going to get a bit boring. Overall then, that's it for my thoughts on the Karma. I do believe it has a reasonable chance of returning, especially if you look at the quality of the finish and the premium level graphics that this car had. Even back in GT6 in 2013, it looks really good for the time. So overall, we'll have to see if it does come back in a future Gran Turismo title, but until then, of course, I'll see you next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.